Hey friends, what's up? This is Metro and welcome to the most comprehensive Wraith guide, and I'm not over-exaggerating here. I've been a Wraith player since the early closed alpha, got over 300 hours on her, and today I'm gonna share my secret tech on how to hard carry your team. And I am sure there's gonna be stuff in there that other people don't tell you about. We're gonna go over the basics first and then get into really advanced techniques. Wraith is a hero that is really good at dealing raw damage while still having decent survivability. She does not fall into the category of tanky characters like Abrams or Shiv, but also is not as frail as Haze or Vindicta. She excels at mid-range fighting, where you don't want to be too close but also not too far. Utility-wise, her kit is designed around dealing damage and dealing damage safely. Wraith's one ability, Card Trick, throws out cards that track to enemies, but more importantly, also your crosshair. The ability to control the cards with the crosshair also allows for some insane kill secures around corners that you could otherwise never reach. Once they impact anything, they do direct damage and splash damage in an area. They recharge not on a cooldown but based on how much damage you deal otherwise. Any bullet or melee damage or any other spirit damage you deal will charge up the cards up to a maximum of 2 if you leveled up Card Trick at least once. This is the primary tool for Wraith to deal spirit damage early, and you can build into those cards by upgrading your spirit items. One must pick here is extra charge, allowing you to hold up to 3 cards. There are further upgrades down the line that will allow you to hold even more, but I found that in my high level games, building Wraith around a gun is a lot better, and most Wraith mains tend to agree gun damage is king right now. This ability is very deadly early on. Once you pick up extra charge and mystic burst, you can catch opponents in lane off guard with how much damage you're able to deal in a very short amount of time. Later on in the mid game, you can use a 1 for farming jungle camps with splash damage, and obviously to secure sills and burst enemies down in teamfights. This ability should be leveled up twice during laning. The 50 extra damage on upgrade level 2 ups the damage to an insane amount in early fights. This is your main damage to harass the enemy in lane, but also can be used for clearing creep waves fast in the lane if needed. We do want to avoid maxing Card Trick early in every scenario. Ideally, the level 3 upgrade for 5 points will be the very last thing we'll get, since all of the other abilities are more valuable on max level. Wraith's 2 ability is called Project Mind and is a main movement tool. It allows you to teleport into any direction and is used to initiate, but more importantly, disengage fights. The range on base level is quite short, but more importantly is also an insanely long 45-second cooldown in early game. While we will skill this early, we will hold it for situations where we really need to escape, like if we're getting ganked or drop to very low HP. This brings me to Wraith's biggest weakness in the early and mid game, which is her mobility. A lot of people are claiming Wraith is like the highest mobility character in the game, and while she becomes very mobile later on, in the early game she's very squishy and very slow. Our build is going to include items that allow us to stay alive and get around the map faster until we have Project Mind leveled to the max level, which will reduce the cooldown drastically from 45 to 15 seconds. And this will also be the ability we max out first almost every time. A lot of other builds I see on the internet max out the ultimate for mass lifting or max out the 3 for lifesteal on the fire rate, but this is, in my opinion, the complete incorrect way to level Wraith. The ability itself seems quite simple to use, but it can be quite tricky sometimes because it takes the hitbox of your character and teleports it. Meaning, if you're close to an obstacle with your character model, you can end up teleporting in place and dying right after. You really want to try to be mindful of where your character is currently standing and make sure your 2P will go through properly before you click the button. Short note here, my item and skill build is released in a separate video that I will link in the comments, but you can also very easily find it in-game looking for Metro Wraith. Full Auto is Wraith's 3rd ability, and it will increase your and your team's nearby fire rate. In the early game this is quite weak since it will only add some more damage to your bullets that hit like a wet noodle anyways in laning stage, but this skill will be super useful later on to farm the jungle in the mid game and will be our press to win button in the late game. You can put either 1 or 2 extra levels in this early on, but do not max it out until you have your teleport up to max level in any case. I know the extra 35 lifesteal seems quite juicy, and it's an insane buff late game, but the lifesteal is tied to how much damage you do, right? So in early and mid game, since you won't deal as much damage as fast, there is no point in maxing it out early. How do we do more damage? By farming souls. How do we farm souls? By staying alive and getting from creep camp to creep camp as fast as possible. So again, I can only reiterate, maxing out your project mind is gonna be essential in the early and mid game. Wraith's ultimate ability is called telekinesis. It shoots out a projectile that slowly follows an enemy until it hits them, it lifts them up, locks them in place and damages them. It's one of the best, if not the best abilities to win isolated 1v1 fights in the game. It also becomes a monster in late game teamfights when you level it to max, allowing you to lift every single hero that is close to you at the same time. It does require some practice to use, despite seeming so easy, since the projectile has to hit the enemy before the lift occurs, which means if the enemy has enough stamina, movement abilities, or abilities that break the tracking, they will basically get back to their base before they're even lifted, or worst case, it will not lift them at all. Examples are Mowing Krill's Burrow, Dynamo's Quantum Entanglement, Pocket Suitcase, Ivy's Stoneform, the list goes on and on. So in order to use your ultimate effectively, you either need to bait out specific cooldowns that can interrupt it, or be really close to the enemy so they don't have enough time or stamina to get away in time. Once you do lift them though, it's almost always over. Point your gun at their head, throw a card or two for good measure, and they're gonna be dead before they touch the ground again. I recommend leveling up at least one extra level for the shorter cooldown early on, but do not max this out before your 2 and your 3 ability, since the final level of lifting multiple enemies at a time will only come into great effect in late game team fights. And early on, in a lot of situations, you won't be able to lift more than one person, even if you have the ultimate maxed out. Which leads me to the main point of the video and one thing you should really take away from it. How do you play Wraith and how do you become the hard carry? We'll split this up into 3 sections. The early laning stage, the mid game and the late game. Let's start with laning. Let me add here that this is assuming you already have basic laning mechanics down. If not, no worries, I have a separate laning guide on YouTube as well. You can find it in the description. Wraith is a solid character in the lane. She does okay against almost everyone, but also doesn't do amazing against most characters. If your main goal is to just win your lane, there are better options out there. That being said, if you play well, you can very easily end up rolling your opponent with a few tricks. First off, always try to have creep pressure into the enemy tower. Try to consistently get damage on either the creeps or the enemy hero to keep recharging your cards and use them against the enemy hero or heroes when you see an opportunity for an easy direct hit. Keep this pressure up and build up extra charge and ideally Mystic Burst for extra damage. You now have the opportunity for one of the highest damage combos early on in the game, which is after you have Mystic Burst, extra charge, you're gonna deal an insane amount of burst damage. Even more so if you have the card trick leveled up to at least level 2. Otherwise, if you're in a matchup that is not favorable for you, like going against a Pocket or a Kelvin, you gotta stay defensive. If you feel like you could easily end up dying early, pick up a base point of your 2 after your card, otherwise you can skill your 3 for some extra burst damage potential. And on a very basic level, focus on killing your creeps. Wraith has a lot of bullets in her magazine and the velocity of the bullets is also quite fast, so she does win out in speed against a lot of the cars when it comes to last hitting or denying. For the build, here's what I use for laning. This build can be found in-game under Metro Wraith and is consistently updated to fit the meta perfectly. The core idea is always the same though, extra charge and Mystic Burst are king to get more card damage. Right now I'm running extra regen to sustain after, basic magazine to have even more last hits, more damage. But again, unless they nerf extra charge or Mystic Burst really hard, they are just the best 2 early game items for Wraith in the game. Once you're through your early game and your laning stage and hopefully you came out on top, you want to start building for the mid game. And here is where you get your first core item, which is Tesla bullets. They are gonna be 3000, so you will have to farm quite a bit to get there. Ideally, you want to have this at the 7 or 8 minute mark. Don't worry if you don't get it as fast, but this is gonna be the core item to let you farm really fast. Wraith needs a lot of money to get online. Before you have a lot of money, you're not gonna be very useful in team fights. A big mistake I see a lot of Wraith players do in the mid game is they're trying to gank a lot and roam a lot and play Wraith like a haze where, oh, I have lift, I can go to any lane and lift an enemy hero. Most of the time, as I explained in my ability usage, the enemy will end up getting away from your telekinesis, which makes you waste your time. Worst case scenario, you die. So after you use your ult, you're suddenly very vulnerable to everything. There will still be scenarios in the mid game where you will help your team win a fight. If the enemy pushes your towers, you can defend. If your team has a very big team fight with the enemy team, you can come in from the side, lift someone, take them out of a fight and secure the kill. Just be aware that if you end up in a scenario that is a major team fight, let's say more than 3 people on both sides, your value as a player early, mid-game is gonna be diminished until you get to Intensifying Magazine. You wanna play passively and you wanna try to farm as efficiently as possible while split pushing and still helping out your team that way. Once you get Tesla, you don't wanna just AFK farm the jungle. You wanna look first and foremost for lanes that are safe to push. In the early to mid game, laning creeps will still give you the most money, even compared to jungle camps, and then you want to farm the jungle. Now here is where the strength of Wraith comes in. You can farm jungle camps and even enemy jungle camps pretty safely. As long as you have your teleport up on level 2 at least, you will be able to get out very fast if you have to. And if an enemy is dumb enough to decide to contest you in a 1v1, you will win. Unless they have way more money than you will win every single 1v1 in the mid game, early game, and even late game. And that is the strength of Wraith. After you get Tesla bullets, you're gonna continue and go to get Fleetfoot, which is gonna make it so you can shoot while not having a movement penalty. You get Bullet Lifesteal, get Quicksilver Reload, Bullet Shredder, a Combat Barrier, and then Intensifying Magazine. At that point, if you get to any objective in the game alone and the enemy doesn't contest you, that objective is gonna die within 5 seconds. At this point, you cannot be stopped in 1v1s anymore. You should ideally end up having more money than most of your teammates and more money than the enemy teammates. Once you have your entire mid-game build finished, that is when you can really start playing with the team. And if you have to, you can run it down as 6. Push a walker, push into the enemy base, take mid, take a major team fight. Which is where we get to the tankiness, okay? There are defensive items you can buy. I end up buying spirit armor almost every game here because spirit damage seems to be the main thing that people still deal in the mid game. Okay, it's very rare that I get bullet armor or escalating resilience instead. But at that point, Wraith is not super squishy anymore. You will have enough survivability to be able to sustain in the fights. And if you have your 3 leveled up to max at that point, you will also have enough bullet lifesteal to sustain even longer. That being said, you do not want a frontline, okay? Unless you really have to. The only scenario you really want to be the frontline is if no one else on your team is like tanky enough to do it. But you want to have your tanks in front of you and you want to engage the fight on a mid-range. And the targets you want to look for in team fights are the main damage dealers of the enemies. You want to take them out of the fight. So what you can do is you can teleport up onto roofs of houses and pick off anyone you like. And ideally, again, it's gonna be targets that are somewhat squishy, that deal a lot of damage. Like Vindicta, okay? Get on a roof next to them, lift them and instantly burst them. So really try to abuse the vertical teleport of your 2 ability here. I see so many people walk in behind their team, they take a bit of damage and they teleport out. No, don't even lift early. I see way too many people starting a major team fight with a lift early and it gets completely cancelled by, like, let's say the enemy has a viscous and they just bubble it, they just cube it and your lift becomes completely useless. Try to be mindful of your lift and really use it on targets where you know they can't get away in time or they don't have a major escape ability. That being said, if you are the main initiator of your team, if you are the most mobile and let's say nobody else is around, but you see an enemy target that is somewhat out of position, you can definitely teleport in after you have your teleport on level 3 and lift someone immediately and initiate the fight that way. If you do it well, it can also work. But ideally, you want to check out how the fight goes and then lift during the middle of the fight and not necessarily use this as an engagement tool. There's way better initiators like Shiv that can engage drop in, Paradox, right? They can like start the fight with a swap, etc, etc. There's way more reliable initiators. You are the main damage dealer. You're basically like an AD carry in League. Assuming you have the entire mid-game build done, we're getting to late-game items. Up until this point, I would recommend you follow the build on laning stage and mid-game 1-to-1 from left to right and add defensive items as needed if you need the survivability. But in late game is where you really have to decide what item is useful against the enemy team comp, and this is where your experience as a player should really come in. What I like to go for first is usually Crippling Headshot or Vampiric Burst. That is your main first 6.3k or now it's 6.2k item that is going to add even more damage and survivability to your build. Crippling Headshot is going to make it so you deal more damage, but more importantly, the target you shoot is going to be debuffed. They're going to take more damage from bullets and spirit, right? So if you end up in team fights and your team is focusing the same target with you, that person is going to blow up insanely fast. The Empiric Burst is going to give you even more movement speed, but more importantly, the active, when you pop it, you have an insanely increased fire rate and you have insane lifesteal. So you can use this both offensively and defensively. Assuming you get a lift off, you pop Vampiric Burst together with your 3 and you have such a high fire rate that they will die. No matter how tanky they are, they will die in the air because you shoot so fast. Or the fight goes on for a while and you drop below, let's say, half HP. You pop Vampiric Burst and kite the enemy backwards. You have really fast movement speed. Fleetfoot makes it so you don't slow down while you shoot. So you can run the enemy in circles. Like just run away from an Abrams while shooting at them and suddenly you're back to full health and the Abrams is dead. So Vampiric Burst is insane, Crippling Headshot is insane, Lucky Shot is a great alternative, despite what Smifu in his guide will tell you, oh, Lucky Shot is bad. Kinda clickbait if you ask me. If you talk to a lot of high-level players, if you do the math correctly, there are ups and downsides to every item. The devs are actually very, very good at balancing all the items. And the reason Lucky Shot is still a great item is the bonus damage that it procs. The 90% bonus damage that Lucky Shot gets you actually procs no matter what and is not affected by headshot damage. So what that means is, in practice, right, even if you're the best aimer in the game, you will not hit all headshots. So if you watch Smifu's guide, where he goes, look, I'm only shooting the head and it did so and so much damage, and then I bought Crippling Headshot and it did more, it's actually kind of deceiving, because a really good player will hit 10 to 20% headshots. And the rest of your shots is gonna be either misses or body shots, right? And this bonus damage procs no matter what, okay? So it doesn't get amplified for headshot damage. Even the best players in the game will only hit, again, around 20 to 30% headshot damage. Which means in practice, this will deal more single target damage than Crippling Headshot every single time. Crippling Headshot is better in teamfight scenarios where you have someone else shooting the enemy too, because it gives that bullet resist reduction and that spirit resist reduction. So it's great for a team to focus on one target. But if you're in an isolated 1v1 scenario and the enemy has pretty decent movement, Lucky Shot will allow you to deal more damage. Same for Glass Cannon, which is an item I buy sometimes when I'm really far ahead. Glass Cannon is like kind of like a snowball item. If you're already really far ahead and you think you're pretty safe at getting a few kills before you die, then this is an insane item, right? Because once you get the stacks up on Glass Cannon, you do insane damage. It's a very risky pick. If you don't end up getting a lot of kills after buying this, then it's just worse than both Lucky Shot and Crippling Headshot. Another item I really started liking is Surge of Power, and I put this on my 3. It increases the fire rate even further, but more importantly, gives you bonus movement speed and bonus spirit ability power, which means the 3 bonus damage spirit power is gonna go even higher. So it gives you more kiting ability, less cooldown on the ability. Yeah, other options, Unstoppable, almost a must if the enemy team is really good. If you end up in that hard carry position, they will try to shut you down. So Unstoppable is an insane item. One of the best, if not the best items in the game, other than Fleetfoot, which is my favorite item in the game, which you want to use if the enemy hard CCs you. If every time you engage, the Moen Krill runs into you and ults you, or if the enemy has a lot of crowd control and slowing abilities, if the enemy has an Infernus that always tags you, you pop Unstoppable, all those negative status effects are gone for a total of 6 seconds. And 6 seconds in Deadlock is a long time. It is enough time to kill multiple enemies. So if you pop this at the right time, you will be able to just end up killing 1, 2, 3 opponents. And by the time your Unstoppable is over, you have maybe Vampiric up, you regen health, and you win the game that way. At this point, you mostly fight around 5v5, but you're still gonna keep up the playstyle of pushing out every lane. Again, at this point, it's gonna be really easy for you to relocate around and stay safe because you have a teleport on 15 seconds. So you can push lanes really fast, and assuming your team is up in money or even, you wanna take the fights. But there's also a way to play around your team if your team is behind, and that is split pushing. Another thing Wraith is really, really strong at, especially in the late game. So if you realize your team is getting caught out, you're losing a lot of fights, you're losing a lot of players, you're consistently staggering, try to push out lanes on the sidelines where the enemy is not, right? So if your team engages, let's say, on the bottom right of the map, you can push top left. And I've had so many games where the fight goes on for a while, fight takes a while, and I push the lane in insanely fast, and suddenly I'm in the enemy base and I break both shrines before the enemy can come back. Or I break a shrine and one of the enemies comes back and I can take the isolated 1v1. They teleport back into base and they think, well, I can push this guy out of my base, right? He's alone. He shouldn't be able to be here. No. You turn it around, you lift them, you burst them instantly, and suddenly the enemy team is in a world of trouble. Another really big thing you can do is once you have your telekinesis on max level, you can contest mid-boss and steal the Rejuvenator pretty easily. So what you can do is you drop down when the Rejuvenator drops and chain lift everyone on the enemy team. At this point, if you have Unstoppable, right, they can't stop you by stunning you, etc. Even if you don't have it, there is a good chance you can steal the Rejuvenator. It is one of the best tools to steal it, other than like an Infernus ult, right? Because you can lift everyone that is sitting around the Rejuvenator, there is a good chance your team can turn the fight around, steal mid-boss, okay? So that's another really big thing you can do on Wraith. So, in summary, Wraith, really solid in early game, can win almost every lane if you're skilled, but is not like the best laner, is pretty weak in team fights in the mid game, but is insane at split pushing and farming jungle camps. My number one rule that I always say to myself in the mid game, once I get Tesla, do not participate in team fights unless you really have to. If the enemy team is hardcore pushing your walkers at like 15 minutes, you need to help. Okay, there are situations where you need to help your team, but if you can avoid it, try to farm the jungle and try to split push while staying safe. And then in the late game, be the carry your team wants you to be. Be smart with the team, learn positioning, try to use high grounds, and practice your aim to an extent. Wraith is pretty aim intensive, and this game, Deadlock, is really about efficiency. If you have any questions, if I missed anything, please let me know in the comments. I know this was pretty in-depth. Again, the build can be found under Metro Wraith in-game, or there is a completely separate build guide video out that I will also link in the comments. If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing. We're gonna do a lot more Deadlock guides. There's an aim guide that I have coming up very soon, or might even be out already. Until next time, see you friends, bye bye.